Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Now if you're from South Africa, you know we have a lot to be proud of. We've got beautiful landscapes, incredible wildlife, and people with a spirit that just won't quit. But like any family, we've got some issues we need to talk about. And one of the biggest, most persistent issues is corruption. It's like that one relative who always borrows money and never pays it back, but on a national scale. It's a shadow that looms over our progress, affecting everything from the lights staying on to the money in our pockets. So, today, we're doing something a little different. We're shining a very bright, very unflattering spotlight on some of the biggest players in this drama. Today, we're counting down the top 10 corrupt companies in South Africa. We're going to look at the scandals, the schemes, and the staggering sums of money that have disappeared into a black hole of greed. This isn't just about naming and shaming, it's about understanding the deep impact this has had on our country and on every single person living in it. This list is a journey through some of the most shocking headlines of the past decade. From state-owned giants to private sector titans, no one is safe from scrutiny. We'll unpack the complex webs they spun and see how their actions have left a lasting mark on South Africa's economy and its people. It's going to be a wild ride, maybe a little infuriating, but definitely eye-opening. So, grab your Rooibos, get comfortable, and let's see who's made the list and why. Kicking off our list at number 10 is a name that sends a shiver down every South African spine. Eskom. Eskom. The company that's supposed to keep the lights on but has instead become the national symbol for when things just don't work. For years, we've planned our lives around their load-shedding schedules. You know you're about to cook dinner and bam, darkness. Trying to watch the end of a rugby match? Tough luck. Eskom has other plans. It's become a national pastime, checking the load-shedding app like it's the weather forecast. But this isn't just incompetence, oh no. It's far more sinister. Eskom has been ground zero for some of the most breathtaking corruption scandals in our history. We're talking about inflated contracts for coal, awarded to politically connected companies that sometimes supplied rocks instead of actual coal. I'm not even joking. At one point, they were paying top dollar for coal that had the energy value of a wet sock. It's a level of audacity that's almost impressive, if it wasn't so devastatingly crippling for the entire country. Then you have the massive cost overruns at their new power stations, Medupi and Kusile. These projects were meant to be our salvation, the end of load shedding. Instead, they became monuments to mismanagement and graft. Billions of rands over budget and years behind schedule, all while lucrative contracts were handed out to friends and allies of the powerful. It's like they were building a five-star hotel for ghosts with our electricity money. The impact is everywhere. Small businesses can't operate, students can't study, the economy grinds to a halt every time the power goes out. And who bears the brunt of it? The ordinary South African, who not only has to deal with the darkness but also has to pay higher and higher electricity tariffs to bail out a company that's been systematically plundered from the inside. Eskom isn't just a failing utility, it's a case study in how corruption can switch off a nation's potential. So while we sit in the dark, fumbling for candles and wondering if the Wi-Fi will ever come back on, it's important to remember why. It's not just about aging infrastructure. It's about a decade of looting, of deals made in the shadows, and a complete failure of governance. Eskom makes our list not just for the darkness it creates, but for the dark dealings that caused it. Coming in at number 9, we have a story that rocked the private sector to its core, Steinhoff International. For a while there, Steinhoff was the golden child of South African business. They were a global giant, a furniture behemoth that started in SA and went on to conquer the world, buying up brands in Europe, Australia, and the US. They were on the cover of magazines, their CEO was a celebrated visionary, and their stock was a darling of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. It was a true South African success story, or so we thought. In December 2017, the House of Cards came tumbling down in the most spectacular fashion. The CEO resigned, and the company admitted to accounting irregularities. Now, accounting irregularities is a polite way of saying they basically invented money. It was one of the biggest corporate frauds in history, a multi-billion euro lie that had been going on for years. They had created a complex web of off-balance sheet entities to hide debt and inflate profits, making the company look far healthier than it actually was. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The Steinhoff share price plummeted by over 90% in a matter of days. Think about that. Billions of dollars in value just gone, poof, vanished into thin air. This wasn't just a problem for the big-shot investors, this wiped out the life savings of thousands of ordinary people, including many pensioners who had invested their retirement funds in what they thought was a blue-chip, safe-as-houses company. The scale of the deception was mind-boggling. Forensic reports later revealed a small group of senior executives had orchestrated this elaborate fraud for years, enriching themselves while leading everyone else off a cliff. It was a betrayal of trust on an epic scale, shattering the illusion of corporate integrity and exposing the weaknesses in our regulatory systems. How could something so massive go undetected for so long? That's the multi-billion rand question. Steinhoff's scandal is a chilling reminder that corruption isn't just a government problem. The private sector has its own ghosts, and sometimes they're even bigger and scarier. The Steinhoff saga is a lesson in greed, arrogance, and the devastating consequences that follow when a few powerful people decide the rules don't apply to them. It earned its spot on this list by showing the world how to build an empire on a foundation of pure fiction. At number 8, we enter the world of a company whose name became synonymous with bribery, Bosasa, later known as African Global Operations. On the surface, they were a facilities management company. They provided services like catering, security, and fencing to government departments. Sounds boring, right? Well, behind that dull exterior was one of the most sophisticated and shameless bribery operations this country has ever seen. Bosasa's business model was simple, yet diabolical. They didn't just bid for government contracts, they bought them. They allegedly lavished politicians, civil servants, and even presidents with gifts. We're talking cash in bags, luxury cars, high-end security systems for their homes, and even paying for lavish parties. In return, Bosasa was awarded contracts worth billions of rands, often without proper tender processes. They were essentially running a subscription service for corruption. The testimony that came out of the Zondo Commission of Inquiry into State Capture was like something from a gangster movie. Former Bosasa executive Angelo Agrizzi, the man who blew the whistle, described a vault filled with cash, ready to be dished out to their network of corrupt officials. He spoke of monopoly money meetings where they would literally sit around a table and divvy up the cash for bribes. It was brazen, it was systematic, and it was deeply embedded in the state. The beneficiaries of this largesse were allegedly a who's who of the political elite. The company effectively captured key departments, ensuring a steady stream of inflated and often unnecessary contracts. They were installing fences, feeding prisoners, and providing security, all at prices that were grotesquely inflated, with the taxpayer footing the bill. Every rand spent on a Bosasa bribe was a rand not spent on schools, hospitals, or services for the poor. The legacy of Bosasa is a stark illustration of how private companies can actively corrupt the state for their own gain. They didn't just take advantage of a broken system, they were architects of it. They greased the wheels of government until they spun right off their axle. For turning bribery into an art form and for masterminding a system of kickbacks that infected the highest levels of power, Bosasa has more than earned its place on this list of shame. Our number 7 spot goes to the airline that flew high on national pride but was constantly running on the fumes of taxpayer bailouts, South African Airways, SAA, the Flying Springbok. For decades it was a symbol of South Africa's connection to the world. But, behind the friendly cabin crew and the promise of a warm welcome was a cockpit of chaos, mismanagement, and alleged corruption that sent the airline into a financial nosedive from which it has never truly recovered. The story of SAA's decline is a long and turbulent one. It's a tale of endless government bailouts, numbering in the tens of billions of rands. Every few years, like clockwork, the airline would be on the brink of collapse, and the government would step in with another massive cash injection. It was like pouring water into a bucket full of holes. The money would disappear, and the fundamental problems would remain, chief among them being a string of questionable leadership and procurement deals. One of the most infamous figures in the SAA saga is former chairperson Dudu Myeni, a close ally of former President Jacob Zuma. During her tenure, the airline was plagued by allegations of cronyism and dodgy deals. There were controversial route changes that made no economic sense, attempts to push through deals with obscure financiers, and a general disregard for corporate governance. It felt less like an airline and more like a personal fiefdom, run for the benefit of a connected few rather than the country. The consequences were dire. SAA became bloated, inefficient, and uncompetitive. Talented staff left, morale plummeted, and the debt just kept piling up. While other international carriers were innovating and expanding, SAA was stuck in a cycle of crisis and bailout. The airline that was once the pride of Africa became a cautionary tale, a flying symbol of the cost of political interference and poor governance. Ultimately, SAA had to be placed into business rescue, a form of bankruptcy protection, costing thousands of jobs and leaving a legacy of debt. While it has since been restructured and is attempting a comeback, the scars remain. SAA makes this list because it shows how a cherished national asset can be flown into the ground by a toxic mix of political meddling, mismanagement, and a culture where accountability was seemingly optional. At number 6, we have not just one company, but an entire empire built on influence peddling and the systemic hijacking of the state. I'm talking, of course, about the various companies owned by the Gupta family. This isn't just a story of corruption, this is the story of state capture, a term that became part of our daily vocabulary thanks to these guys. Their network of businesses, from media to mining, became instruments for siphoning billions from the state. The Guptas, a family of Indian-born businessmen, forged an incredibly close and controversial relationship with former President Jacob Zuma and his family. This relationship allegedly gave them unprecedented power. They were accused of influencing cabinet appointments, essentially choosing the ministers who would head up the very departments they wanted to do business with. Imagine being able to pick the referee for a game you're playing in. That's the level of influence we're talking about. Their companies like Oak Bay Investments, Tegeta Exploration and Resources, and the media outlets An7 and The New Age were at the center of the storm. They landed lucrative, often unsolicited contracts with state-owned enterprises like Eskom and Transnet. For example, their company Tegeta, a small, inexperienced mining firm, managed to acquire a massive coal mine with the help of some highly suspicious prepayments and guarantees from Eskom. It was a deal that raised red flags everywhere. Their media channels, An7 and The New Age, acted as propaganda arms, pushing a pro-government narrative and attacking anyone who dared to criticize the family or their political allies. They hosted lavish business breakfasts sponsored by state-owned companies, giving their political friends a platform while taxpayers footed the bill. It was a masterclass in using media to control the narrative and legitimize their questionable activities. The Gupta Empire represents the pinnacle of state capture in South Africa. They allegedly infiltrated the state at its highest levels, manipulated democratic processes, and redirected national resources for their personal enrichment. The Zondo Commission spent years untangling the complex web they spun. The Guptas didn't just break the rules, they tried to rewrite the entire rulebook to suit themselves, leaving a trail of broken institutions and public trust in their wake. Riding into our number 5 spot is another state-owned giant that became a central player in the state capture saga, Transnet. As the custodian of South Africa's ports, railways and pipelines, Transnet is the backbone of our country's economy. It's responsible for moving goods and commodities, a vital function for a trading nation. But this backbone was systematically weakened by a plague of procurement fraud and kickbacks on a truly monumental scale. The corruption at Transnet was most famously exposed in the procurement of 1,064 locomotives. This was a massive deal, worth over 50 billion rand, intended to modernize South Africa's freight rail fleet. Instead, it became a feeding frenzy. The cost of the locomotives was massively inflated, and a significant portion of that inflated price was allegedly kicked back to Gupta-linked shell companies and other facilitators. We're talking about billions of rands in kickbacks. The scheme was audacious. Contracts were awarded to Chinese manufacturers, but with a crucial condition. They had to partner with local companies that were, surprise surprise, connected to the architects of state capture. These business development partners did little to no actual work but skimmed enormous consultancy fees off the top. This money was then allegedly laundered through a network of accounts in Dubai and Hong Kong, lining the pockets of the corrupt elite. Key executives at Transnet, including former CEOs and CFOs, were implicated in pushing these deals through, often ignoring warnings from their own treasury departments and sidestepping proper procurement processes. They were the insiders who opened the doors and let the looters in. The Zondo Commission heard testimony that laid bare how these officials allegedly worked hand in glove with the Guptas and their associates to rig the system. The damage done to Transnet was immense. The entity was saddled with overpriced and in some cases unsuitable locomotives. Its finances were crippled, its reputation was in tatters, and its ability to serve the South African economy was severely compromised. The locomotive scandal at Transnet is one of the most glaring examples of how critical state infrastructure projects can be hijacked for personal gain, turning a vehicle for national progress into a getaway car for looters. At number 4, we have a story that is not just about corporate greed, but about the betrayal of the very people a bank was created to serve. This is the tragic story of VBS Mutual Bank. VBS started as a small regional bank, a Stockwell bank, primarily serving poor rural communities in the Vembe district of Limpopo. It was a beacon of hope, a black-owned institution meant to empower the financially excluded. But this beacon of hope was hijacked and turned into a personal piggy bank for a group of executives, politicians, and their cronies. They orchestrated what a forensic report later titled, "The Great Bank Heist." It was a simple yet devastating scheme of looting of epic proportions. They essentially created fictitious deposits and then doled out massive, fraudulent loans to themselves and their connected friends with no intention of ever paying them back. The scale of the looting was staggering. Nearly 2 billion rand was stolen from the bank. This wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. This was real money. It was the life savings of go-go's, grandmothers. It was the collective funds of municipalities that had been illegally encouraged to deposit public money with the bank, and it was the burial society funds of entire communities. All of it, gone. The list of beneficiaries reads like a who's who of the politically connected in Limpopo and beyond. High-ranking politicians in provincial and national government, municipal officials and business people all had their hands in the cookie jar. They used the stolen money to fund lavish lifestyles, luxury cars, helicopters, designer clothes, and sprawling mansions. They were literally feasting on the savings of the poor. The collapse of VBS Mutual Bank was a human tragedy. It left thousands of vulnerable people destitute. We saw heart-wrenching images of elderly depositors queuing for days, hoping to get some of their money back, only to be turned away. VBS is a particularly painful entry on this list because the corruption was so direct, so personal, and so predatory. It wasn't just about stealing from the faceless taxpayer, it was about robbing your neighbors, your community, your own people. Pulling into our number 3 station is the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa, better known as Prasa. If Transnet was the freight train of corruption, Prasa was the passenger train that went completely off the rails. Tasked with providing affordable public transport for millions of working-class South Africans, Prasa instead became a hotbed of mismanagement, ghost workers, and some of the most bizarre procurement scandals you can imagine. Perhaps the most infamous Prasa scandal was the tall trains fiasco. Yes, you heard that right. The agency spent billions of rands on new locomotives from Spain, only to discover upon their arrival that they were too tall for the South African rail network's overhead power lines. It's like buying a brand new suit without checking the size and showing up to the party with your trousers around your ankles. It would be funny if it wasn't so tragic and wasteful. This was just the tip of the iceberg. Investigations by the public protector and other bodies uncovered systemic corruption at Prasa. There were billions in irregular expenditure, contracts awarded to shell companies, and payments made for work that was never done. The agency was bleeding money, and the person who tried to stop it, CEO Lucky Montana, was himself later implicated in receiving kickbacks and living a life of luxury far beyond his official salary. It was a mess from top to bottom. The real victims, as always, were the commuters. While executives were allegedly enriching themselves, the train service was falling apart. Trains were constantly delayed or canceled, stations became derelict and unsafe, and vital infrastructure was vandalized and stolen. Millions of people who rely on trains to get to work, to school, to life's essential appointments, were left stranded. The collapse of the rail services had a devastating impact on the poorest of the poor. Prasa's story is one of profound institutional decay. It's a story of how an essential public service was hollowed out by greed and incompetence. The image of brand new, uselessly tall trains sitting in a yard gathering dust is a perfect metaphor for the state of the agency. It represents a monumental failure to serve the public and a spectacular success in wasting public money, securing Prasa a high-ranking spot on our list. Taking aim at the number 2 spot is our state-owned arms manufacturer, Denel. This is a company that was once a source of national pride, a world leader in sophisticated military technology. From the Rooivalk attack helicopter to advanced missile systems, Denel was a symbol of South Africa's high-tech capabilities. But this symbol of strength was brought to its knees by the echoes of the infamous arms deal and a fresh wave of state capture-related corruption. Denel's problems are deeply rooted in a culture of questionable deals. The original post-apartheid arms deal in the late 90s was marred by allegations of massive bribery to politicians and officials, a scandal that has haunted South African politics for decades. This set a dangerous precedent. In the era of state capture, Denel once again found itself at the center of schemes designed to benefit politically connected individuals rather than the nation. The Gupta network allegedly set its sights on Denel, attempting to muscle in on its international partnerships. The most notorious example was the attempt to set up a joint venture called Denel Asia with a company linked to the Gupta's business associates. This deal was pushed through by a compromised board, despite having no clear business rationale and threatening Denel's existing relationships in key Asian markets. It was a blatant attempt to capture a slice of Denel's international revenue stream. The consequences of this and other instances of mismanagement were catastrophic. Denel was hollowed out. Talented engineers and scientists left the company in droves. Its finances collapsed, and it struggled to pay salaries, let alone invest in new research and development. The company that once produced world-class technology was suddenly unable to fulfill its orders or manage its basic operations. It was a brain drain and a financial drain all at once. The decline of Denel is a tragedy for South Africa's strategic independence and its industrial base. It shows how even our most sophisticated and sensitive state assets were not safe from the rot of corruption. The focus shifted from national security to personal enrichment, from innovation to insider dealing. For allowing a critical national asset to be targeted and systematically weakened by greed, Denel is our runner-up in this hall of shame. And at number 1, the top spot on our countdown of South Africa's most corrupt companies goes to an institution that is meant to be the voice of the nation, but for a time became a mouthpiece for the powerful and a playground for mismanagement: the South African Broadcasting Corporation, the SABC. The public broadcaster holds a special place in any democracy. It's supposed to inform, educate, and entertain, all while remaining impartial. The SABC, however, took a very different path. Under the infamous leadership of COO Hlaudi Motsoeneng, the SABC descended into chaos. Motsoeneng, a man who famously lied about having a matrix certificate, ran the broadcaster like his own personal kingdom. He purged the newsrooms of journalists who were critical of the government, instituting a sunshine journalism policy that banned the showing of violent protests. It was a direct assault on editorial independence, turning the public broadcaster into a state propaganda machine. But the problems went far beyond censorship. There was rampant financial mismanagement. Motsoeneng awarded himself massive, irregular bonuses, including a staggering multi-million rand success fee for a deal with MultiChoice that was widely criticized as selling off the SABC's family jewels. There were dodgy deals, inflated contracts, and a culture of fear and intimidation. The SABC was technically insolvent, yet its boss was living like a king. The SABC 8, a group of brave senior journalists who spoke out against Motsoeneng's censorship policies, were fired, highlighting the toxic environment within the institution. Their fight became a national symbol of the battle for press freedom in South Africa. They put their careers on the line to defend the integrity of the news, standing up to the man who declared he would be the SABC's Alpha and Omega. The SABC tops our list not just because of the financial corruption, which was immense, but because its corruption attacked the very foundations of our democracy. By trying to control the flow of information, by silencing dissent, and by replacing news with propaganda, the SABC's capture represented a profound threat to an informed citizenry. It was an attempt to blindfold the public while the country was being looted. For this deep betrayal of its public mandate, the SABC is our #1 most corrupt entity. So there you have it, 10 stories of greed, power, and betrayal that have left a deep scar on South Africa. From our power utility to our public broadcaster, the scale of this corruption is staggering, and it's easy to feel overwhelmed, even cynical. But looking at this is not about despair, it's about understanding the enemy. Corruption isn't some vague abstract concept. It has names, it has addresses, and it has a very real, very painful cost that is paid by every single one of us, every single day. The fight against this decay starts with knowledge and ends with accountability. We need institutions that are strong enough to resist capture, and a justice system that ensures those who plunder public funds face real consequences. It's not enough to just hear about these scandals and commissions of inquiry. We need to see justice being served. This requires constant pressure from all of us. It means supporting investigative journalism, protecting whistleblowers, and demanding transparency from both our elected officials and corporate leaders. This list is by no means exhaustive, and the fight is far from over. The seeds of corruption, once planted, can grow in the darkest of places. That's why we have to keep the spotlight on, keep asking the hard questions, and keep demanding better. We, the people, are the ultimate auditors of our nation's health. What do you think? Let us know in the comments if we missed any companies. And more importantly, let's continue the conversation about how we can build a more accountable and prosperous South Africa for everyone. Thank you for watching.